Welcome everyone to the 2020 InnoPower Minority Business Conference entitled Beyond 2020. Today's panel discussion is centered around minorities in the workplace, and I'll just give a bit of details on the discussion today. In light of recent social events, creating an equitable and inclusive workforce is more important than ever. Organizations large and small are beginning to examine their hiring practices, and in many cases, completely changing the corporate culture to make sure everyone has the same opportunities to succeed. For business leaders, how are you supporting equity, diversity, and inclusion? Are you teaching the skills necessary to rising leaders of color to succeed in their careers? And for employees, how can you protect yourself at companies that have been slow to take action, and how can you achieve your greatest potential? And I can personally attest to the theme of this year's conference, Beyond 2020. What we're learning this year in business, in the social and the political arenas will definitely go beyond 2020. I was also very excited when I was asked to moderate this particular session on being a minority in the workplace. No matter your industry, whether you work in a large or a small company, or if you're an entrepreneur or a minority, in any type of business, really, being a minority has its own sets of challenges and opportunities that are important to consider in everything that we do. My name is Doneisha Posey. I serve as the Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Belonging at Ivy Tech Community College. I'm very pleased to be joined today by an amazing group of leaders to tackle some of these challenges and opportunities today. So I'll ask the panelists to introduce themselves and to just give us a little bit of background on who you are and your role. And we'll start with Terry.
Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Terry Morris, and in my day job, I serve as a director in our information and digital solutions portion of Eli Lilly and Company. I also serve as the national president for the Black Data Processing Associates, which is a national organization for underrepresented participants in tech across the U.S. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Corey?
Hi, everyone. I'm Corey Wilson, Vice President of Community Engagement with Pacers Sports and Entertainment. I also serve as Executive Director of the Pacers Foundation. So equally similar to as Terry shared, involved in the community and engaging communities of color within activities that we do as far as our activations as well as our players. Glad to be here.
Stephanie?
Hi, sorry about that. I had some technical difficulty. Glad to be here. Stephanie Kim with Telemon. I'm currently the CAO there. We are a telecommunications infrastructure and industrial manufacturing company, kind of two very different areas and rapidly expanding. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
And Candy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Candy King. I currently work as Director of Strategic Projects, Diversity and Inclusion for Roche. I have been at Roche for 18 years, and 3 of those years I actually spent working in Roquefort, Switzerland in the IT organization. Happy to be here today.
Awesome. All right, thank you, panelists. And quick little housekeeping. All of our participants are on mute for the duration of the session. If you have a question for our panelists, please type it in the chat or in the Q&A box, and I will attempt to get to as many questions as I can during the session. I'll be monitoring the chat, so please don't wait until the end for your questions. I think this conversation is just going to keep flowing. All right, so let's get started with our questions. And this question is for everyone. Define what an equitable and inclusive workforce means to you. And whoever wants to start.
I'll start. Oh, can you guys see me? So for Telemon, for an equitable and inclusive workforce means to us that we put our policies and processes in place to ensure fairness, A couple years ago, we brought out a core concept called our employee value proposition, and that is 3 main concepts. The first is honoring transparency, the second is championing diversity, and the third is cultivating growth. And so with that championing diversity, we proactively go after that as one of our core concepts as part of our value prop.
So I don't mind jumping in, and I'll say on the onset here that the views that I represent are Terry's views, so they are that much more authentic. But I will say that they're seasoned by 20 years of experience with Eli Lilly and company. You know, the one thing I'd add in the context of equity and inclusion. We had a conversation recently with some peers about what is the difference between equal and equitable, and the difference is fairness, and that's really what is rooted in how I think about inclusion. I mean, if you're seeking to be fair, then vicariously you're seeking to include, and I suggest that that's how I see it on display in my day job, and actually how I try to engage with my peers and those I work with on a day-to-day basis.
For me, I think it's important to look around your table and see who you don't have represented around that table and look for those voices to bring them into your process. For us, it's really important that we create inclusive leadership and accountability. So how do those leaders draw people in, specifically people who look different than those leaders, because that might be a bit uncomfortable for you, utilizing our business resource group so that they can have a voice and help to create that inclusive culture. How do you come to work and be your authentic self? And then making sure we've got a diverse talent strategy to where we're attracting those individuals and moving them throughout our organization, which is key.
And I'll back clean up here and just add that the piece that I look for is, when equity and inclusion and diversity is a part of the entire agenda and not just the end of the agenda. I've been a part of organizations where it has made the agenda, but it's usually those last 2 minutes when everybody's kind of wrapping up. And so, a high performing organization that really reflects some of the key elements of a diverse and inclusive organization will have diversity and inclusion be throughout and not just be a specific agenda item at the end.
And just going off of what Corey just said, I want to switch to the next question. Describe the shift in conversation and or actions that you've seen since May, since the height of the murder of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and others. Describe the shift in conversation that your organization has had relative to equitable and inclusive hiring practices or just initiatives in general.
So for us, it's actually been a huge shift. After all of that happened, we heard from our African American Business Resource Group that, we're not doing okay with what's currently happening with systemic racism. So we implemented what we call unity circles, and we had a senior leader partner with our African American Business Resource Group leaders and actually held a conversation. And it started with, let's talk about what's currently happening. Let's talk about the protests and how are you feeling? And for a lot of our senior leaders, that was very uncomfortable for them. And we talked about we need to get you to the point to where you're comfortable with being uncomfortable and actually standing out in front of these conversations. There are several organizations that look to outside vendors to help with that, but we really push for our senior leadership to partner with our African American Business Resource Group and have these conversations. And the other thing that was key to that is we gave our African American leaders exposure to individuals within our organization at the highest levels that maybe they didn't normally have. So it really created, I think, a unique situation to now, to Corey's point, that really is starting to be embedded in our organization. Leaders asking to have unity circle discussions with their individual teams. And so it's really taking on a life of its own. So I think if anything that I'm most proud of is we are having the conversation, we're being uncomfortable, and we're getting to know each other at a completely different level, and the support is there.
And I'd say for us at the Pacers Sports and Entertainment, I'm proud that we formed an Inclusive Excellence Action Committee that is comprised of 29 cross-departmental, cross-functional individuals from the organization, all the way from the ownership to administrative assistants, who are all looking at equity, diversity, and inclusion, specifically focused on Black people, and what we as an organization need to address, not only internally, but also externally. We're at the point now where we are planning on Monday to share the findings and the results from that. We have 24 action items that we intend to move forward with that will both be public facing as well as internally focused. Those were things that weren't happening before the unfortunate killing of George Floyd. And our president, Rick Fuson, is pedal to the metal on making sure that this stays at the forefront, which makes it candidly a little bit easier for me to do my job, because everyone knows that it's important and wants to be a part. I said we had 29 people. We probably could have had over 50 people because of the interest in the topic. So I really am encouraged by what we've been able to do to this point.
I'm happy to say that, at Lilly, it has been a journey, but our journey started some years ago. We've been having a very reflective conversation about diversity across the various dimensions of diversity for the last several years, actively looking to explore what are the opportunities for us to do differently now. But I will say what happened since earlier this year, the conversations became, I don't know, realer, if that's even a word. They have, while people may have been more guarded in their version of their lived experience prior to Q1 of this year, people feel very open to share a very raw version of their lived experience. And I'll quote our CEO, Dave Ricks, here about 2 weeks ago at the end of an earnings call. He said, in the context of social justice, that the time for platitudes is over. And it was an allusion to it's time for action, it's time for results, it's time for us to execute policies that make a difference. And I say I get behind him 110%. I too agree that the time for platitudes are over. It's time for results.
So here at Telamon, we have a little bit of a different outlook, I guess. Unlike, Terry at Lilly and Candy at Roche, that very large organizations and probably a fairly diverse workforce as well. And then unlike Corey with the Pacers, where they're very public facing, Telamon is a lot of B2B, and we're a fairly small company. But what we've done is there's always been that conversation in the background about what it is, but no one ever really talked about it. And so what has come about is that this has really forced us to kind of take a look. And if we were doing something like evaluating our metrics, we've always evaluated the metrics, but now we're looking at those metrics and we're having the conversations as to, wow, we're either doing really good in this area where diversity is concerned, or we're not doing that great and we need to make some changes. And so that has really forced the conversation to the forefront to everyone's mind, especially in the leadership team, that these are things that we need to focus on. These are things that we need to do. What can we do now to make a difference going forward and change our practices?
The next question is specifically for you, Stephanie, and Candy. I want to ask you what advice would you give to those who have recently been asked to lead change in the organization moving forward? What are some tidbits of advice that you would have for them?
You want me to start, Stephanie?
Sure, go for it.
Okay, I'll take it first. So I will say, do it. And I like to say, make sure you show up and show out. Bring all of the yumminess that comes with it. Be your authentic self. Be productive. Make sure you achieve those results, but do it. I think a lot of times the biggest issue is that we don't get asked to do those leadership opportunities, especially if we're very different from what our senior leaders look like. And there's the similarity biases that we know exist, so we may not get asked. So there's several times where I might be the only in the room, but I say bring all of it with you and make sure that you show up to the table and let everybody see what you're capable of doing.
I wholeheartedly agree with Candy. Well said. And I would just add that, you know, whoever is asking for that change to occur, you know, the best thing that they can do also is lead by example. Because if they're asking someone to drive change within that organization and they're not doing that action themselves, I mean, your employees are going to look at you and be like, why are you asking me to do this? Because you don't live that life either. So the best thing that we can do as leaders is live by it ourselves, and that will help drive change as well.
Thank you. Our next question, what impact has the protests around social injustice had on your particular organization? And I'd like to start with Corey on that one.
Well, you know, obviously our players are very active, both on the NBA and the WNBA side, and leveraging their voice. And I'm sure all of us have seen not only the recent activities of this week, but, you know, going back to when before the bubble was even announced, what the players were doing as far as social activism. I'm really encouraged by, you know, the leadership of the organization, individuals like Rick Fusion again and Tamika Catchings in specific, thinking about how they were active in some of the community conversations that are going on. But then more specifically now, you know, we have shifted that external focus to working on some of the deliverables that I spoke of earlier, and really leaning into discomfort and having some of those tough conversations internally about what can we do better as an organization. And so we've heard some candid feedback, not only from our own experiences, but those of people in our networks. And that in this time and in this moment has what has led to change. And I'm encouraged by that. Whereas, you know, sometimes those may be things where you say, okay, thank you for sharing. We'll note that. But now we're really at a moment where, because of some of those instances and the activism that's happening, we're able to make some positive change. So I would say that's what's happening here.
Andy, you want to add to that about Roche?
Yeah, I think right now the big thing for us is historically it's been diversity and inclusion really pushing to get our information into our leaders. And the big change that I've seen now, leaders are actually pulling in D&I. So they are wanting to have conversations. We're having team meetings where we're developing individual action plans for those leaders. And it really does center around three important pillars. So for us, it's about business. So how do we really impact the business from a diverse perspective? Community, where should we be involved? What should we be doing? How can we have a bigger? And then really looking closely at culture, which is our recruiting arm. And so how can we be different? Being very transparent with our numbers, people of color. Where do we stand today? Where should we be focused? We're talking about a sponsorship program for people of color, which is very different for our organization. So my heart is big right now with what's happening. Not so happy about the way it came about, but glad that we are having some very positive outcomes from it, to where people are embracing this and they're really pulling it in. People who look very different from what we've seen in the past being focused on D&I, I think is really, really key right now.
I agree 100% with that. Here at Ivy Tech, So One Ivy Tech is the largest community college in the nation. It's also the largest post-secondary institution in our state. And we employ over 6,000 individuals every year. So we're huge, right? And not only are we huge, but we're here to educate, the next generation of leaders here in the state of Indiana. So as we've been thinking through diversity, equity, and we use the term belonging, we're centered on ensuring that our students, our staff, our faculty, and the community around us feel that they have a place at Ivy Tech, feel that we are, we're here for them no matter, where their background is, whether you're in rural Indiana or you're in urban Indiana. That's really key to what we're doing at Ivy Tech. So with our strategic plan of our institution, we've added on an additional strategic, a strategy, goal 8, which is ensuring an equitable and diverse community where there's a sense of belonging. And within the strategic plan, everyone around the state is able to work on the strategy and the tactics that we're doing to ensure that we are eliminating systemic inequities for our students, that we are leveraging our leadership's power and privilege to promote positive change, that we're creating that sense of community and belonging for everyone. So I'm just really proud of the work that we're doing also at Ivy Tech. As you said, this work started before May, right? But it has taken on a life of its own. We don't want, that to be the reason, but I'm happy that we are getting there and things are moving much more quickly than things have happened before. All right, so our next question, Terry, as I mentioned, that feeling of belonging, that sense of belonging and being included, can you talk to us about how do you make sure that everyone feels included and can be their authentic self?
Well, on the inclusion side of that, I would say the leaders have to lead there. While we're all woke, I think we can thank the pandemic for that to some degree, that our attention spans have been focused a bit. But people who have felt not included for X number of years prior to now, they may need help feeling comfortable with engaging. So you have to meet people where they are. I'll give an example. Very recently, I was a coach on a mentor circle, and an individual that I know had something to contribute, but they were not contributing. So I just sent them an IM and say, hey, this is an opportunity for you to engage. Now, I didn't call them out, over the in the broader group, but I did invite them to engage in that discussion. Don't miss this opportunity. On the authenticity side, I think it's one of those where you need to know what version of you want to be digested by your culture. I acknowledge that, every version of Terry, I need to at least know that that's the version that's going to be digested. So there's a cultural dimension to authenticity that can't be ignored. At some point in the future, I believe that can be less of a thing, but it is a thing now. And I just need to bring the consciousness to how I might be consumed in the culture that I'm operating.
Thank you. So there is a unique relationship that we captured in a previous conversation that we had with Candy and Corey. So I'd like for you two to talk about the unique partnership that Roche created with higher education partners to promote inclusivity in the talent pipeline, and just kind of how we got there too.
We didn't script who talks first, so Candy, you want me to go first? Okay, so in a previous life, my previous employer was with the University of Indianapolis, and my role was to really look at strategic ways we can strengthen the talent pipeline for employers who are all looking for high quality, diverse, ready talent. One of the concerns Now, not being in higher ed, I guess I have a little bit more freedom to say this, is higher ed doesn't necessarily always do the best job in preparing the students for what the workforce needs. And so, you know, a lot of times you'll hear employers say, you know, the student is great at reciting, you know, whatever product that they had to memorize in school, but can they solve a project? Can they solve a problem, think critically? And so we were able to work and partner with Roche in the development of a talent pipeline program that one, targeted diverse students earlier in their matriculation in higher ed. So starting as early as freshman year, they would be identified as what we call them Roche scholars. And with that came certain benefits. Roche came to the table with us in an unprecedented way from the perspective of working with our faculty in developing a curriculum that would be appropriate and necessary for the types of careers and training that would be needed by Roche. And so if the students stayed with the program, and I think this is year 2 or 3, so forgive me, Candy, that's where you can fill in the holes. But the program was one where the students then, upon graduation, were guaranteed a job, opportunity for a job, as well as a $10,000 stipend to start with as an incentive for them to stay through the program. Really kind of unprecedented in nature, largely because, you know, faculty invited business into the conversation. So again, I know it was a previous life for me, but really inspirational thought, an intriguing way of looking at how to solve that talent pipeline and engage diverse audiences. So.
Yeah, and so this is our second year, Corey, of doing this program, and we just finished up our internship for this season, and bright individuals that were a part of that program. I think the other thing that's really cool about it, it's a part of our organization where we have a very experienced workforce, and so that was one of the reasons why it was hard to bring early in career talent, because individuals love the job so much they weren't leaving. And so by implementing this program, it gave us an opportunity to bring in early in career and then also look at talent. So one thing that we're doing is looking at, for field service, what do our patients, our customers, the markets look like that we serve? And we want to make sure that our workforce reflects that. And so in this particular group, we didn't have a whole lot of diversity, and we didn't have a whole lot of ethnic diversity or gender diversity. So this program also allows us to create a talent pipeline of those bright individuals to also help create the workforce that we know we need for the future to reflect the customers and the marketplaces that we serve. So I can't say, I mean, it's a great program. It's getting tremendous feedback. So, you know, thank you, Corey, for that partnership. It really is making a difference in our organization.
All right, I like to shift gears just a little bit. So Terry, you are in the IT sector. We know that there are disparities within the IT sector at all levels. Can you talk about how you ensure your voice is heard when you're the only one in the room?
Use it. You know, it's one of those where if you are the only one in the room, if you don't use it, you waste, your presence is wasted. Your advocacy is wasted. And I appreciated that early on in my career that that I am creating the opportunity for others to be accepted by normalizing, you know, my difference. And if I don't take advantage of that to one, be prepared. So if I'm in the room and I have an opportunity to move the dime through thought leadership or solutions or whatever, but if I waste that, then I actually do more harm to progress than I'm helpful. So the first thing I offer is just use the presence that I have and ensure that that I'm a strong representative of what is possible by having more diverse representations in the room.
Awesome. Anybody else want to add to that? I don't want to just leave it to Terry. Anybody else want to I'll go on to the next one because I still got plenty of questions left. All right. So Stephanie and Corey, you both are in senior levels of leadership within your organizations. What advice do you have for young people of color who want to rise in leadership in the corporate world and also working within the community?
Corey, do you want me to go or do you want to go?
Please go ahead.
All right. I would say that you need to be able to advocate for yourself. No one's going to be able to advocate for you better than you. Do parts of the next job that you want. Get involved in, community activities that you're interested in, or even if you only have a slight interest in them. Get exposed to as much as you can get exposed to, because that's the only way you're going to know if that's a good fit for you, how much you enjoy it, what that can mean for your career going forward. You could ask for more challenging projects, job shadow. There's so many things, but you need to advocate for yourself. I mean, that would just be for, anybody, because you and you know what you can do. So you have to do you.
Yeah, and I would add to that, maybe taking a little bit different bend on it. I can't tell you how many LinkedIn requests I've gotten lately from different young people internally in the organization, but also externally. And LinkedIn is great, but it's the follow-up, and it's really seeing through with that request. And, I jokingly say this, but, this is really an important time to do a lot of the mentoring and connections and building authentic relationships, because we're all at home. So it's not like I can say, oh, I don't have time because I got a flight to catch. I'm not going anywhere here, honestly. So, how do you really take advantage of that time to get with not only your senior leadership, but also individuals in the community that you're attempting to reach? This is you got a captive audience. And I've encouraged a lot of the young people that I have talked to say, seize it, take advantage of this time, because it is a moment where we're kind of not doing much as far as going out and venturing where we wouldn't have that ability.
Thank you. And I think this next question is for Candy. It's from the audience. So one of the questions was, developing comfort comes through openness to immersion and participation in uncomfortable conversations regarding race, religion, etc. How do you go about opening minds?
And that's actually a great question. And we've been doing so much of that here lately. And I think it comes with a journey. So for us, it really has been about when we asked our senior leaders to stand up and have these conversations about systemic racism that we knew they were very uncomfortable having, we created a safe place for them to ask us any type of questions that they had. No question was off limit. And so that was really part of the learning. And I know sometimes we say as a culture, why do we have to continue to educate? But I look at that as, let's be the bridge when people are asking and they're coming to you. So for me, it really is about creating that safe place for people to ask those questions. We brought in community activists. Dr. Posey came in and helped us, and I made him available to our senior leaders to ask any questions that they had about what's going on, what's happening in this community. I had one of our most senior leaders reach out and say, hey, do you think it's okay if I join the African American Business Resource Group? Because I don't know a lot about this space. So that encouragement and having that conversation, no judging, creating that safe place really goes a long way, I think, in the situation and the time that we're in. And patience. I mean, realizing it's a journey.
Wow, this conversation, we could go on and on, but they're trying to cut me off and say we're done here. So I'd like to just thank the panelists for your time. I think I speak for us all when I say if anyone wants to find us on LinkedIn, please do so. We are happy to connect with you all. So thank you so much for your time.